A nasty security bug was found in the apt package manager used by Debian, Ubuntu, Linux Mint, and hundreds of other distros. Canonical brings Ubuntu 18.04 LTS to IoT and embedded devices with Ubuntu Core 18 with 10-year support. Are you a Chromebook power user? Get more out of your Chromebook by installing these Linux apps. SUSE releases Enterprise Linux for all major ARM processors, also announces the SUSE Manager lifecycle. Microsoft declares the end to its smartphone era. It tells its users to move to iOS and Android devices. These are 5 stories that I will be taking into account. And the first story on the docket is this gigantic story about this nasty security bug found in the apt package manager. Apt, APT, is the package manager in Debian, and most Debian-based distros like Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Elementary, and Bodhi, and hundreds of others. So this is a big deal. Probably more than 90% of desktop Linux users especially are probably using a Linux system that uses the apt package manager. Reading this article from ZDNet, written by Stephen J. Von Nichols, the blurb at the top of the article here reads, one of Linux's core software installation programs, apt, was recently found to have a serious security hole. It's now patched. So the good news is they found the bug. They've patched the bug. If you're on a system that uses the apt package manager, by the way, you probably should update your system. So again, if you're on Debian, Ubuntu, Mint, and most every Debian-based, Ubuntu-based Linux distribution, you use the apt package manager. Most of you probably go to the command line to install stuff, right? Sudo apt install name of program. Sudo apt remove name of program. Even if you don't do that, even if you use a GUI package manager like the GNOME Software Center or Discover and Plasma or the Synaptic package manager, guess what? Those are just front ends to apt. They're still running that sudo apt install name of program command. It's just you're clicking a button in the GUI to do it instead of actually having to type the command. So if you're running any of those distributions, if you're running any Debian-based or Ubuntu-based distribution, again, update the machine. The updates hopefully should patch your machine. What type of security bug was found in apt? Well, they call this a man-in-the-middle attack. So reading a little bit from the article here, this bug, the hole would, quote, enable a remote attacker to execute arbitrary code as root on any system installing any package. To understand exactly how the attack works, you'd have to know a little bit about apt and dpkg, the package manager, the packaging system in Debian. It gets a little detailed, but just know this, apt does not use HTTPS. It doesn't use the secure HTTP. It just uses your standard HTTP protocol. Now, Debian and a lot of Debian defenders will say HTTPS is not necessary. Standard HTTP is fine for the package manager, but that is not the case because, quite frankly, this sort of man-in-the-middle attack, this security bug, really would not be possible if they were using HTTPS. So it does matter. Maybe they will change. But for right now, there are solutions to this problem. They recommend that if you're running a Debian or an Ubuntu-based distro that uses the apt package manager, you should run the following 2 commands as root. What these do, they when you do this patch, the Debian security team recommends you run these commands. Basically, those 2 commands, they prevent, they disable redirects. So you're no longer being able to be exploited with that man-in-the-middle attack. This command here basically disallows redirects when you update the system. The second command disallows redirects when you upgrade the system. So when you do a sudo apt update, sudo apt upgrade, it disables all redirects. That prevents that man-in-the-middle attack. The bad news with that fix is, quote, this is known to break some proxies when used against security.debian.org. If that happens, people can switch their security apt source to use, and then another apt source. So this is a fix, but it could, again, break some proxies. But for right now, you probably should go ahead and run those 2 commands. They also mention, again, if you're on a Debian or an Ubuntu-based system, update your machine. Because this security hole is pretty easy to exploit. So don't wait. go ahead and run that sudo apt update, sudo apt upgrade, because this will get exploited. Now that people know how easy this is to gain a control of your system, really, because now you can execute code as root, using this exploit. Trust me, it will get exploited. It's just days away probably before people are trying this. So go ahead, update your machine. And the next story on the docket tonight is Canonical brings Ubuntu 18.04 LTS to IoT and embedded devices with their new Ubuntu Core 18. So basically this is a new version of Ubuntu, LTS version of Ubuntu, designed specifically for IoT and embedded devices. This comes from Softpedia News here, and this article was written by Marius Nestor. I'm going to read the blurb here toward the top of the screen here. Quote, Canonical announced today the official availability of Ubuntu Core 18 operating system for the IoT Internet of Things ecosystem and embedded devices based on Ubuntu 18.04 LTS Bionic Beaver series. So how does Ubuntu Core 18 differ from your standard Ubuntu 18.04 Server Edition, for example? Well, this new Ubuntu Core 18, of course, has your snap packages, right? Which is all the Ubuntu flavors now have the snap packaging built in, baked in. Many of them are using snaps already on the ISOs. So they plan on using snaps heavily in Ubuntu Core 18 because, quite frankly, there is some security in using the snap package format on things like IoT and embedded devices due to the containerization of the snap pack, right? It's kind of its own little container. It's sandboxed. Another thing that Ubuntu Core 18 might differ than a standard like Ubuntu server install is Ubuntu Core 18 is a very minimal version of Ubuntu. It is stripped way down. Why? Because the less things installed by default, the less attack surface, right? It reduces the likelihood that somebody can compromise that device. The other thing about not having that many packages installed on the system is IoT devices, embedded devices, you may not update those things very often. Well, the less packages that are installed by default, the less need to update the system, because there'll be fewer packages on the system that actually require any kind of update. So that is the good news. Recently, Ubuntu made some pretty big headlines. Just a few months ago, CEO Mark Shuttleworth, Ubuntu CEO Mark Shuttleworth, announced that the company was going to start offering 10-year support on their LTS releases, Ubuntu 18.04 LTS, the desktop and the server. Really, it's mainly for the server market. The server market kind of demands a longer support cycle. So 5 years was pretty long, but 10 years is better. 10 years is what CentOS is doing, for example. So Ubuntu switched over to a 10-year support cycle. They're also going to do the 10-year support cycle on Ubuntu Core 18, the IoT and embedded device release. That 10-year support cycle, again, is critical for, quote, it's an attempt to support long-term industrial and mission-critical deployments of its Linux-based operating system, unquote. Ubuntu Core 18 is available on, of course, the Ubuntu website, Canonical's Ubuntu.com website. You'll find binary images for Raspberry Pi 2, Raspberry Pi 3, Snapdragon-powered devices like the Dragon Board 410C, as well as the Intel NUC. Very cool. I have a Pi. I wouldn't mind playing with this just to see what it's about, although I don't expect it to be much. The way they describe it, it is, again, an extremely minimal install. And the third story on the docket tonight is, are you a Chromebook power user? Increasingly, Chromebooks are becoming very popular. Chrome OS is becoming one of the more popular operating systems on the planet. Quite frankly, as people move away from Windows and are looking for alternatives, if we disregard the mobile space with Android and iOS, Chrome OS is probably the next best thing, right? Yeah, I know Mac is out there, but if the Chrome OS is not more popular than Mac OS already, it will be very, very soon. So this article comes from Computer World, written by J.R. Raphael, and as always, I'm going to link to all the articles on today's show in the show description. So the best Linux apps for Chromebooks. So make your Chromebook even more capable with this carefully selected set of Linux apps for expanding Chrome OS's potential as a business tool. So he's going to list what he thinks are the best Linux apps to try out on your Chromebook. And yes, you can run Linux apps on Chromebook. Not all of them are going to function correctly. So that's why he's picking some of the ones that he knows work on Chrome OS and Chromebooks. And again, this is kind of designed for power users. Most Chromebook users are not going to go out of their way to try to get Linux apps installed on their Chromebook. But if you are, this is at least this author's here suggestions of some of the ways to really improve your Chromebook. And the first suite of apps really that he recommends, the power user that doesn't mind trying to install Linux apps on your Chromebook, install LibreOffice. If you want a fully featured Office suite, LibreOffice, right? I know most Chromebook users are just going to use Google Docs, right? You're already in that Google ecosystem. You're using Google operating system and the Google Chrome browser. You're just going to use Google Docs, online. If you're a Microsoft customer, you already have a subscription to Office 365. You may just use 365 in the Chrome browser, but LibreOffice is a fully featured standalone Office suite. Doesn't require the browser, doesn't require internet, and it's every bit as powerful, in my opinion, as the Microsoft Office suite. Although not 100% compatible with Microsoft Office, it's pretty close. It's like 99% compatible. But for example, if you save a word processing document in LibreOffice in the open document format, and then open it later in Microsoft Word, don't be surprised if there are some formatting issues. It'll mostly be correct, but there could be some slight differences in the formatting. The same with the presentation software. But for the most part, LibreOffice is every bit as good as Microsoft Office. Again, it's a standalone Office suite. If I needed to do serious Office document work on a Chromebook, I absolutely would install LibreOffice. Fantastic suggestion here from the author here. The next thing he suggests is Focuswriter. I'm not familiar with Focuswriter. It's a plain text editor. It looks like more of a note-taking app. It's just something to quickly write down a few things. Evolution is not bad. Evolution is a standalone email client. If you don't do webmail, most Chromebook users are just going to use webmail. They're going to use Gmail, right? They're in that Google ecosystem. But if you want a standalone email client, Evolution is not a bad option. Slack is an extremely popular app, but there is a lack of a true native Slack application on Chrome OS. We have it on Linux though, so you can get Slack on Chrome OS by installing the Linux version of Slack. GIMP is fantastic. GIMP is one of the best free and open source programs on the planet. It's your Photoshop alternative, your free and open source Photoshop alternative. Maybe not as powerful as Photoshop, but guess what? I'm not paying an outrageous amount of money as a subscription either to use GIMP. So GIMP's not a bad choice. If you need to do graphical kind of design work or something on a Chromebook, that could be a good option. FileZilla is a excellent file transfer protocol client, FTP client. So that's for, like uploading files to a remote server like a web server or something. Most people probably don't need an FTP client. If you do, though, it's available. And of course, Firefox. You don't like Chrome? Why are you using a Chromebook? But if you don't like Chrome as your browser, you prefer Firefox, of course, just install Firefox. Now, it's not all, just roses and rainbows in Chrome OS. You can't just get any Linux app installed and working on your Chromebook. So the first thing you notice, there wasn't a lot of multimedia stuff here, right? Where's your audio and video editors? Where's Audacity and Kdenlive and DaVinci and things like that? Well, a quote from the author here says, quote, "Those apps aren't on the list yet. However, because Google's Chrome OS Linux implementation doesn't yet support audio or accelerated graphics and thus isn't able to properly run such programs," unquote. So, things like Blender, for example, I wouldn't expect to get that working on a Chromebook, at least not right now, maybe in the future, but those were a few really good suggestions. Again, if you have a Chromebook, you're kind of a power user and you want to go ahead and try to, get some of these Debian packages installed on your Chromebook. I absolutely agree with all of his suggestions. Great suggestions. And the fourth story on the docket tonight is SUSE. They recently released Enterprise Linux for all major ARM processors. So SUSE Linux, Enterprise Linux for servers, has been around forever. SUSE has been around for a long time, but this is really their first release, official release for a Enterprise Linux for ARM. So if I go over here to this story from Network World, this was written by Andy Patrizio. SUSE Linux Enterprise Server has been around for a while, but this is the first official release, and by official release, he's talking about the first official release for the version for ARM. According to the article here, quote, SUSE is on par with other major enterprise Linux distributions, Red Hat and Ubuntu, in the x86 space, but it has lagged in its ARM support. It's not like SLES for ARM is only now coming to market for the first time either. It's been around for several years, but on a limited basis. So they did have some ARM images, but they didn't support it like they support their standard enterprise Linux. One of the senior product managers at SUSE is quoted here, quote, SUSE subscriptions for the ARM hardware platform were only available to SUSE partners due to the relative immaturity of the ARM server platform, unquote. So they had ARM images, but they offered limited support for them. The reason for that is, again, they said it was a pretty immature platform initially. Now they're ready to go ahead and roll it out, give it full support, the standard SUSE Enterprise Linux support. Reading ahead, quote, now that we have delivered 4 releases of SUSE Enterprise Linux Server for ARM and have customers running SUSE Linux on ARM servers as diverse as the tiny Raspberry Pi and the high-end HPE Apollo 70 servers, we are now ready to sell subscriptions directly to customers. So, of course, this is what Enterprise Linux is all about, SUSE Enterprise Linux. It's about making money. It's about selling you support. Again, this is Enterprise Linux, right? This is not community distro Linux. So they're trying to compete in that same space that's occupied by, of course, Red Hat. Increasingly, Canonical's also in that space. What ARM server processors are supported by the new SUSE Enterprise Linux server for ARM? Well, you can expect it to support chips from Cavium, Broadcom, Marvell, NXP, Qualcomm, Centric, a number of chip manufacturers there. Now, because their Enterprise Linux server for ARM edition supports so many different chips and different devices, they have a rather strange way of pricing support for this thing. So, and it's a little complex, even just reading the article about it, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It looks like they're basing the price, quote, on, quote, core-based pricing for lower-end ARM hardware and socket-based pricing for everything else. So for lower-end ARM hardware, they're doing core-based pricing. So how many cores is this processor? And the higher-end stuff, it looks like they're doing socket-based pricing. That's interesting. And the fifth and final story on the docket tonight is Microsoft. They declared an official end to their smartphone era. They've actually declared that official end a while ago, but the real end of it is getting close. Few months away, you're no longer going to get any kind of support on those Microsoft mobile devices, those that use Windows 10 Mobile. So they're telling all their users right now, start planning the move. You need to move over to an iOS or an Android device very soon. So this article comes from Computer World, written by Greg Kaiser. So, in the wake of the company's failed acquisition of Nokia's phone assets, Microsoft is reminding Windows 10 Mobile users that support ends this year, and they should move to iOS and Android devices. So, Microsoft, a while back, they bought phone giant Nokia for many billions of dollars, to try to compete in the mobile space, to try to offer a viable alternative to Android and iOS devices. That was a complete and utter failure. And Microsoft admits it was a complete and total failure, that they wasted billions of dollars even, buying Nokia and trying Windows 10 Mobile. But it is what it is. But they still have a lot of people out there on those devices. So later this year, you're no longer going to get support. Support officially ends this year in December 10th, 2019. So some services are going to remain active for months after that expiration, but again, you're no longer getting any kind of support, no kind of security support, anything like that. So Microsoft, they don't want to hear from these mobile customers, right? They're done with mobile. They've been done with it. And they're telling you guys right now, if you have one of these devices, move to an Android or iOS smartphone now. Previously, Microsoft has said it was going to support every version of Windows 10 Mobile, each version that came out. It was going to support it for 24 months, I think. Let's see. Initially, mobile was upgraded every 6 months, just like the desktop OS, gets an upgrade every 6 months. But yeah, they planned on supporting it a minimum of 24 months. The last Windows 10 Mobile feature was tagged 1709 back in October 2017, I guess was the last Windows 10 Mobile update. So 24 months from that date is not very far away. What makes the story kind of interesting is not that Microsoft failed, in the phone space, that their acquisition of Nokia was a disaster. Many of us could have predicted that. But what makes this story interesting is that Microsoft now has to basically beg a lot of their customers to switch to software that they didn't create, right? Telling people to move to Android and iOS devices, that's strange coming from Microsoft, but this is what they have to do. What really tells you that Microsoft is serious about the end of mobile is they have acknowledged that the support, that's coming to an end very soon, that includes for commercial customers as well. So if you had any kind of commercial contract with Microsoft, with these mobile devices, that's ending. That's ending at the end of this year, so it's done. So it looks like this is just another in the long line of things that Microsoft has acquired over the last couple of decades that just did not pan out. Microsoft has a pretty bad history of buying companies and then just ruining them. So, they bought Hotmail many years ago. Hotmail was never the same. They bought Skype. Skype's never looked the same. Their acquisition of Nokia failed really quickly. So they bought Nokia for $7.6 billion, and less than 2 years after that, they started admitting it was a disaster and started writing it off. Of course, now they're starting to lay off some of their employees, anybody that was connected to Nokia and to the mobile space. Now that they're getting out of that, they've already started, changing there. So they began laying off thousands of workers. Most of those workers that they're laying off were inherited from Nokia. And that was the fifth and final story on the docket tonight. This was Taking Into Account episode 26. I try to release a new episode of Taking Into Account every Thursday, so look for Taking Into Account episode 27 sometime next Thursday. As always, other than the 5 main stories I cover, I always like to read a viewer question or comment, and the one I'm going to read today comes from email. So I won't mention the guy's name since I didn't tell him I would do this, but I got this email, one of my supporters. He said he recently tried BSD again, and it almost worked. He had to load a kernel module for Wi-Fi connected to his router, but he could not get to the internet. Then he said he tried Nomad BSD with even less luck. I think I'll be letting BSD alone now. I agree. If you're on your standard desktop, laptop, it's not a desktop operating system, any of the BSDs. I've never had good luck with them. PC BSD back in the day, I tried a couple of different times. It's not great. TrueOS, Ghost BSD, I had a horrible experience trying to get that up and working several months back. So I'm with you there. Then he goes on to write, I tried Arco Linux to see what xmonad was like. I recently did a video on Arco Linux xmonad. I guess he wanted to try it out. He updated the system, rebooted the machine, I guess, and he can't log into xmonad. This is an easy fix. Xmonad, you have to recompile after an update. So drop to a TTY and run the command xmonad space -- recompile, I think is the command. But recompile xmonad, then try to log back in. You probably will be okay on that. He goes on to write, on the positive side, I continue to like qtile on 2 of my desktop or 2 of my laptops. Yeah, I love qtile. I kind of miss qtile. I haven't been on qtile since January 1st when I switched over to i3, and then of course 3 days ago I switched to DWM. So I've been tiling window manager hopping But man, I really miss qtile. Qtile was really comfortable for me. I could do anything I wanted to do in qtile. The config was so easy to hack on because it was written in Python. I probably will eventually find my way back on qtile. It seems like, every few months I end up back in OpenBox for a little bit. Every few months I end up back on qtile for a little bit. I never stay on a window manager too long. I live in it a few weeks, few months, and then try something else. I'll work my way back to qtile, though. It was really nice. Anyway, I want to thank this guy for his email. Before I go, this show was made possible by Ansem, Carlos, Chris, Dylan, Leo, Rob, and Tony. They are the producers of the show. They're my highest tiered patrons over on Patreon. Show's also brought to you by all those fine ladies and gentlemen, all those names on the screen. They help support my work over on Patreon and on PayPal. If you would like to support my work, please consider doing so. You will find me at DistroTube over on Patreon. Peace, guys.